Alrighty guys, so today we're going to be rebuilding this RM85 bottom end. Transmission's already in there. There isn't too much to worry about in terms of the transmission. Remembering this here shim washer, that's got to go on before the other side case half goes on. That's kind of important. And then the shift forks and shift shafts are pretty self-explanatory. They only go in there really one direction, so can't really mess that up. Once you get everything in, you should be able to spin these shafts freely. That is a good sign. If you can't, something's definitely not right. I always put it up on blocks so you can see that it's, it's above the ground, so the crank stub sticks out the flywheel side. Crank bearings and everything are in. I'm just going to give this a wipe down with some brake cleaner on the gasket surface, and then I'm going to cut the gasket set open. I got a Tusk gasket set and a Tusk oil seal set. So this actually has a crankcase gasket, not Bond or crankcase sealant. And we do have to do a little bit of trimming on the gasket for the crankcase portion and the intake side. So I'm gonna get that cleaned up a little bit. We got our dowel pins, one on this side and one on the other side. Put it in that side of the case half. Crankshaft is currently in the freezer, getting shrunken down. And then I'll take my heat gun to the bearings on the inner race and slip it in this side, and then I will heat the other bearing and kind of get everything happy and set that down in the gasket. I got the gasket surfaces pretty clean. Like I said, I got to get that gasket laid on there, just kind of seeing where that's got to get trimmed. Gotta get my razor blade out here. You can see we got the Tusk gasket set. Pretty cheap actually for this stuff. It wasn't really that expensive. That's what it looks like. And we lay it on there. Goes over the dowel pins there. And then we'll have to trim that off. Like I said, I'm gonna go get the crankshaft out of the freezer. I'm gonna start heating this bearing on this side. Maybe I'll get the camera over here so you guys can see. And then we'll get that warm with the heat gun. So we'll be heating that bearing right there, guys. I got myself a heat gun here. So I'm gonna just start getting it warm. Mainly heating on the inner race of it. I can even set the heat gun right on it. The light's gonna be flickering in the background, guys. The shop light here, when the heat gun is on for whatever reason. Get this a little bit warm. Apologize, like I said, for the flickering. So I'm gonna go get the crank quick, and then I'll heat this one more time before I drop that side in, and then we'll work on heating the other bearings, getting that gasket on and slapping that together. I'll also get my bolts out, which I have in my little diagram there. So got all that. Those will all go in from the other side. So I have them all ready. And they all look, they're all fairly clean on the threads and everything. So that should be good. I usually put a drop of blue Loctite on those fasteners, and they're all 8mm heads. I just zip them in with the impact and then go around and check them all for torque. Got the crank out of the freezer. I'm gonna go ahead and heat this up a little bit more. Some guys will use a torch, and you can do that too, as long as the seal and everything isn't in the back side. I always put the seals in after the bottom end is together, and then I drive the seals in. Some guys do it differently, but that's the way I've been doing it for years. So I just get this inner race hot. The crank is cold, so it'll just usually drop right in. We'll see if that's warm enough. So, dropped right in. Got that obviously on the left side. This is your drive side for the clutch side. Make sure your rod's in there. Now, you can go ahead. I can get this gasket in place. So it should let me leave that in there, and then I can cut that out later. So that's how that will work. I can go in there and trim it out afterward. And like I said, it'll just squeeze itself out. So now I'll start heating on the other side, which is this case half. I'll actually heat up all the bearings a little bit. Makes it a little easier to get on that way. And then we'll set this half on. Everything else, like I said, looks really good. And while that crank is still cold, you know, is ideal to put this on. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to try not to make the mistake that I did the last time I was doing a bottom end and touch the super hot bearing with my thumb after I heat gunned it, and man did I burn my finger. So I'm just getting all this stuff warm. Hopefully not to burn myself this time. Like I said, as we're dropping that on, just kind of putting light pressure. Get myself a little mallet here. Tap that down. Maybe that dulls a little bit. There we go. There, she's all the way down. That looks good. Looks spinning. Just gotta be careful to, when I spin this around, start putting some bolts in. I'll actually tip it down on that side now. And I'll continue with our assembly. So now, I look at my little picture, and I can just take bolts and a little bit of Loctite. Looks like the crank is turning, so that's good. And get a little bit of blue Loctite. Like I said, I'll just start ever so slightly. Usually I'll go on the inside here a little bit first. Okay, just weave my way around. Looks like we've got all of them snugged up. Continuously checking the bearings and everything. Now once this is tightened up a little bit, I can go ahead and I can cut that gasket. So I get this retainer kind of straightened out there. That's kind of what holds the overflow hoses on, I believe. So we got that all figured out. Loctite can go away for now. And then I just take a hand ratchet usually, and I snug all those bolts up. Before I snug everything up, take the crankcase, and I'll take my rubber mallet, and I'll give the crank a whack on each end of it to avoid side load on the bearings, to see if there was any. So I'll hit it that way a little bit, hit it that way a little bit. Kind of just see how it feels. It feels really good, so we should be good. You can usually tell if you got bearings that are side loaded. It'll turn really hard, and it'll kind of feel like it's binding. So hopefully you guys could see me when I whacked on the crank there. I just hit on each end with a mallet a little bit, and that kind of just helps prevent if you had a accidental side load on the bearings or something. you definitely want to check, make sure you have free operation of the crankshaft before you'd even continue finishing up the bottom end. So make sure it moves freely. Got them all snugged up a little bit. I'm gonna go look up a torque spec real fast, get that handled, so I can show you guys we can torque all those bolts, and then we can flip it over, start lubricating stuff, and start putting in some seals, and then we can work on the clutch side a different day. Torque spec on the crankcase fasteners is 89 inch-pounds. I do get all my specs and manual stuff from emanualonline.com. So if you guys do need service manuals when you're working on your bike, that is where I go, and that's where I would recommend you go to get your service manuals. Like I said, they got a lot of good specifications in all the service books that you get. And they're all going to be just like the factory OEMs. Next, I'm just coming around, torquing these up. Man, I wonder if my old snap-on torque wrench here is skipping some teeth maybe a little bit. That was a first for me. Usually you just kind of crisscross your way around on the crankcase. The service manual may have a sequence that they want you to follow. To tell you the truth, I've never really followed that to a T, but I have just usually crisscrossed it, starting from the inside out sometimes. I'm just double checking my work here. Especially the ones underneath the flywheel. Definitely don't need those coming loose. That's going to give you lots of grief. We're all set. 89 inch-pounds, all torqued up. Now I'll flip the motor, kind of like it's sitting in the bike. And I'll trim the gasket here in the reed cage, and I'll trim that gasket in the crankcase itself here. Everything else is feeling really good. So that's awesome, real nice and smooth. We put a Wasner connecting rod in this one. Shout out to Keegan at Millennium for doing the crank for me. He always hooks me up, so appreciate that. It's a Hot Rods crank that blew the connecting rod. Put a Wasner rod on it. He had to do a lot of messing around, cutting new centers for it. Got it all trued up within 1 thou. Take a razor blade. Just cut that like that. Same thing on the bottom. Get as close as I can to the reed cage, housing there. Just cut that off. And whatever's left, that imperfection will be taken up by the gasket. You can always take your fingernail too and kind of just chip it away, or if you got a carbide scraper, might be able to take that off. But that looks pretty good. Got that all squared up there. I like to do a clean job if I can and try to get all the residual out of there. And it's all falling out of the engine, not in. So just take that down and then take my carbide scraper, take the edge off there. Oh yeah, real nice and smooth there. So that's good. You guys can see I was working down here, got all that out of that gasket surface. There's a little bit in here. Most likely we'll just leave that though, because it's not going to hurt anything. It's not really going to rob us of any horsepower. So we'll just leave it. And then up here I just got to get this little schniblet from falling in the motor. Got a little piece. And like I said, just taking the carbide scraper and getting the rest of it. Sometimes what I'll do, even when I put the base gasket on, is I'll put a dab of Yama Bond right on that split line when there's a gasket there, and then I set it on. Sometimes I'll do that. But this surface looks like it's all good, fairly clean. So, got one speck of gasket right down in there. Try to get that out of there. Got all that out. Like I said, we'll get some assembly oil in there on the connecting rod. Everything else inside the reed cage is good after we trim that. That'll be fine. All looks good. Everything's secured and tightened. Let's get some 2-cycle oil on there. And I always take some and I tip the motor up. And I drip some down in the holes right on the bearing. I make sure I get a good coating in here. Like I said, it's usually going to leak right out because there's no seal, but I have to get a little lube in there while it's cooling down, and then put a little bit on the other side too. So this is pretty thin stuff, this Lucas stuff, so get a little bit on that side. This is just enough to get everything coated. A little bit in the pin bearing here. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you subscribe, leave a like on the video, comment down below anything that you want to see with this build, or anything I might have missed or not explained clearly enough for you. Leave a comment on that, and I'll make a part 2 and maybe a part 3 to this video, so stay tuned for that.